Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 443. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're honored to have with us the internationally celebrated and award-winning Vermont author, Roberta Harold.
Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. And so this is exciting. So we're talking about your latest book called Portrait of an Unseen Woman, a novel of Annie Shaw. And as of this recording, it's released, correct?
Correct. It was last Tuesday, the 20th, it came out. Yeah.
Okay. Right. And then, we definitely want to be talking about your latest book. Also want to brush up a little bit on your mysteries books, your Dade Wyatt. Is that pronounce that right?
Yeah. That's my my fictional detective. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that Heron Island and Murdered Sleep. Oh, those sound fun. But let's talk about Portrait of an Unseen Woman. So what inspired you to write The Portrait of an Unseen Woman?
I guess it was a state of mild indignation. I saw the movie Glory back around 1989. This has been brewing for a long time. And Glory was a wonderful movie about a little known aspect of Civil War history, which was the role that the Black regiments played in the war, in winning the war. Needless to say, the South didn't have any Black regiments, or they tried to. And because of racism at the time and belief on many Americans' parts, including Northerners, that Black people wouldn't fight, they wouldn't allow Black people to be officers. So the colonel of the regiment was a white guy named Robert Gould Shaw, who was the son of a pair of famous fervent abolitionists. And he pretty much took the regiment at the behest of his mother, who was very much of a fervent abolitionist. And the movie followed him from his early days in fighting in the Civil War, where he's slightly wounded at the Battle of Antietam, on through to his death at Fort Wagner, which was the regiment's first action, in which they had about 40% casualties, including Shaw, who was killed the moment he breached the top of the fort. And I got pretty fascinated by the story, and in the years since, I guess I've become something of a history nerd. So I wanted to know what the factual basis for the movie was. And I found a book of Shaw's letters called Blue-Eyed Child of Fortune, edited by Russell Duncan. And it had a lengthy introduction, in the course of which it mentioned that Shaw had had a wife. Well, there was no wife in the movie. And I said, well, what's wrong with that? She's a real person. She was a human being. She has a story. So I began a very lengthy process of trying to find out more about her. Pretty much ignored it during my key working years, but somewhere around 2000 or so, I started getting serious about it, and discovered that she had been the daughter of a wealthy New York Irish American merchant. Her birth name was Anna Neeland Haggerty, and they were married in May of 1863, May 2nd. Their honeymoon was shortened because he was called back to the regiment sooner than he had hoped. And then he and the regiment marched through Boston on May 28th, 1863, to board ships to take them down to coastal South Carolina. And that was the last time she saw him alive. He died a couple of months later down in the Carolina Lowcountry. So she was a bride for 77 days. She was 28 when she married, and she was 71 when she died. And I wanted to know what had happened to her life in between. And all I could find were a couple of obituaries saying that she had been an invalid for many years, had divided her time between France and Switzerland, and was known for her charitable giving and basically being this hero's faithful widow. And that wasn't very satisfying. Back in Victorian times, invalid could be anything. It could be somebody who kind of sat around, moping all day, or it could be someone with a very serious illness. So I kind of refused to let that identify her, and I decided to start seriously researching what might have been going on with her life. She never did remarry, but I theorized that that wasn't necessarily because she didn't want to, or she would written off men after she was widowed. So after a lot of digging through all kinds of documents and records and so on, I came to find out that she had gone off to France with her birth family. She'd gone back to her birth family after her husband was killed. Um, and her father had been very ill, and they were going all around France and Switzerland trying to find a cure for him for what was probably congestive heart failure, I'm guessing. And somewhere in there also, she developed a serious illness of her own. And later investigation, way down the line and way into the weeds, led me to conclude that it was an ovarian cyst, which isn't fatal necessarily, but they can grow to a point where they can be fatal. But France happened to be the place where the best gynecological surgeons in the world were practicing at that time. And so, since she seems to have recovered from that, having lived a great many years past this incident, I decided that she must have, gone to one of these surgeons and that they cured her of this, and that she went on and had, a life beyond that. The key to it became a finding in 1892, her birth family went back to the U.S. Her brother-in-law was an eminent organic chemist, and he and her sister and their 4 daughters went back to Boston in 1892. She stayed on, and it was the first time in her life she had ever lived alone. She'd either been with her birth family or with her husband. So I wanted to know what she made of that experience of being alone in Paris during the Belle Époque, the period where the arts and music and literature and intellectual life generally were flourishing. So that's where it came from.
Your book, as you mentioned, is based off of a real historical figure. How much, when you had to put together in a novelization, how much creative leeway did you give yourself to kind of fill in the gaps from your research?
Well, I stuck with the facts as far as I knew them. I didn't violate any of the known facts. She had a younger brother, for instance, who died at the age of 8 of a liver disease. She had cousins who died of probably tuberculosis when they were in their early 20s. And her father really was ill. And her mother, she lived with her mother in this Paris apartment until her mother's death about 4 years before the rest of the family went back to the U.S. So I stayed within that, but there were really no clues to her character other than her obituary saying, she was a generous philanthropic giver and all of that, and an invalid. So that part, I was pretty free to make her over in whatever image I chose, and the people around her, some of whom were also real historical people as well. I went with whatever little hints I could get from people's letters and so on. But largely, I just, as far as who the characters are, they're pretty much a product of my imagination.
And so what parts also did you want to, in order to make it want to turn the page and read more, what parts of the things did you completely fictionalize just because there might have been missing some parts in their lifetime that you wanted to fill in with your own?
Right. Well, the one of it's not a spoiler because it's on the back of the book to say that I have her trying to escape the American colony, which was this rather insular group of Americans who lived in Paris for a variety of reasons. Some of them liked the culture, some of them liked the fact that the cost of living was a lot lower in Europe, but they didn't necessarily have much interaction with what I think of as the real Paris, the Paris of Toulouse-Lautrec and the Impressionists and so on. So the desire to escape the American colony is something that I made up. And then the conflict comes when her mother-in-law decides that she's going to move to Annie's sister's vacant apartment and quote unquote take care of Annie, who she still thinks of as a poor invalid. And her mother-in-law, as I've perceived her, with some clues from history and letters that I've read, was not somebody you wanted to have living next door. And she was definitely, as I conceived her, going to cramp Annie's style and pretty well keep her from fulfilling this desire to be part of the real Paris.
Okay.
So that's where the conflict comes in, and that's where I hope the pages turn.
Right. And so how did your experience writing mystery novels help you in producing the portrait of an unseen woman?
In a couple of ways. One is that because the mysteries themselves are historical, I had gotten used to diving down rabbit holes in search of obscure bits of information. And I dove down a lot of rabbit holes in all three of my books. And that's part of what I love about it, actually. It's part of the fun for me. You just, at some point, you have to stop yourself because you'll never get anything written if you keep doing that. So the historical research was already kind of built in. I already knew that I loved doing that, and I kind of knew where to go, where to start looking for things. And the other aspect is that Annie's life was a mystery. There's really no record other than this obituary that says she was a kind a philanthropic person, and she was an invalid. So I came at it in a way of wanting to solve the mystery of who she was, and I really wasn't able to do that in any factual historical sense, but I was able to make up a story that I think didn't violate any of the known historical facts about her, but answered the question of who was this human being, and what kind of life did she have.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. Right. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be your last book, Roberta. You're probably writing more. So, what did you learn from writing about this book, A Portrait of an Unseen Woman, that you've actually added to your writing tools repertoire that you're going to be using in future books?
In a way, it's more of what I'm not going to do,
Okay.
and that is I'm gonna really limit myself from diving down all the rabbit holes. The next one I'm working on is kind of family oriented. There's some mysteries in my family history, and I'm exploring one of those. And so there's not, I have my own memories and the testimony of various relatives to go on, but I don't have huge amounts of documentation to look into in that respect. And in a way, that's going to force me to focus the narrative and get the writing done more efficiently than would be the case for a historical. So stay away from recorded history for a while, I guess, is one lesson to take away. Much as I enjoy it, and I hope maybe someday I'll do something else historical.
Right. Because of that, have you, while you're researching Annie Shaw, what were some of the surprises you found as you were researching her?
I was a little surprised by the fact that the likes of Henry James knew who she was and wrote about her. Uh, in fact, some of the key information about her that I got, for example, the illness that was so severe for her, I learned about from a letter that Henry James wrote to his mother.
Huh.
And it turns out Henry James's younger brother had been Robert Gould Shaw's adjutant in the 54th Massachusetts Regiment and had been very badly wounded in the same engagement that took Shaw's life. So the Shaws and the Jameses knew each other pretty well, and that was kind of a surprise, a useful surprise given what was in the letters. Um, I discovered that her sister had been a pretty good friend of Henry James's. That was kind of interesting, and one of the early scenes in the book is that this aunt, who is Robert Gould Shaw's aunt, who Annie has known in earlier life and who lives in Paris, but they've never connected until now. She's kind of a free spirit, and she takes Annie to the salon the Sunday salon presided over by a lady named Henrietta Rubel. And Henrietta is she's a very interesting character. She was a wealthy woman. Her father was French. I guess I can't remember whether her father was French and her mother was American or vice versa. But she had a salon that kind of bridged worlds, and she was herself a lesbian. And so the people who came to her salons were from every walk of life, poor, starving artists, well-to-do people who wanted to hang out with starving artists and maybe help them starve less. Who knows? So that whole world of this American-French bridge, and this bridge between the sort of mainstream culture and the gay culture of Paris in that period, that was a revelation that I hadn't been aware of before I started the research.
Mm. And talk a little bit about, you mentioned a little bit earlier how you jump into rabbit holes. In general, what's your writing routine like?
The writing routine has gotten horribly less disciplined over the years, I have to say. I was much better about it in my first two books. And I'm not sure quite why I got so distracted that this one took as long as it did. Family stuff. My mother was becoming ill. She eventually got Alzheimer's and died. I was finishing up my career as a management consultant for economic development nonprofits. That was a lot of what I did. And so in an ideal world, you get up in the morning and you go to your writing space and you write 3 pages, and it can be absolutely anything. And I have to be truthful. A lot of what was getting in my way, I felt, when I was doing those 3 pages was just the news. What was going on in the political world. I would spend the 2.5 of the pages griping about what was going on in the greater world, and it was not taking me into the world of writing. It was keeping me in the world of strife and conflict and all the stuff that we're happily experiencing these days. So I finally found with the Annie book, I just had to say, I'm not doing anything else until I write this. I had other things I was working on, including the family story I'm working on now. But I just finally said, this has got to get done. And I'm going to stop doing everything else in my writing life, my creative life, until I get this one done. So it finally got done, but oh Lord, it took forever.
and so I love asking authors this question: how different is the final draft compared to the first draft?
It's about a third of the size.
Really?
The problem was I was finding things about Annie's upbringing and the people around her, like the fact that her grandfather, John Haggerty, endowed the Mercantile Library in New York City, which was established by a group of merchants as a place for their clerks to go so that they could be better educated, so they could go there after hours. And this library was put together by, a bunch of wealthy but not famous merchants. And the Merck Library, the Merck Fictional Center, exists to this day. And, that was pretty cool to find out. And there were, things about Paris in that period, about the that I had gotten into a little bit with my very first mystery. There are anarchists running loose all over the first mystery, and so in the course of researching that, I was reading about some famous or infamous anarchists in France who were going around blowing up restaurants and things of that sort. And in fact, if you look at the period of the book, which about 3-4 months worth of time is all it really covers. There was an anarchist explosion outside one of the police headquarters in Paris, and the anarchist was caught, tried, and guillotined during this period. And a few years after the period of this book, there was the infamous Dreyfus affair, in which an officer of the French army who was Jewish was falsely accused by the brass of having sold secrets to Germany, which he did not. But he was hounded and persecuted for years afterwards. And it created such controversy in Paris that people were lining up on either side of the controversy. And I decided I needed to not get into that. So anything I started writing about that went away. Stuff I wrote about Annie's childhood and her marriage, the early years of her marriage went away. There are a couple of flashbacks in the book of like when Shaw decides to take the regiment, despite the fact that he had asked Annie what she thought and didn't wait for her to tell him what she thought. So there are pieces of the stuff I threw away that come back in small doses, but there are whole chunks of narrative from earlier in Annie's life that I just decided had to be left out.
And was that help from like an editor telling you to cut this out, or was it from beta readers that was helping you to cut that out?
The beta readers were great when I got to 150,000 words and had to get it down to about 100,000 words. Before that, the other 250,000 words, I realized we're not gonna, I couldn't possibly do that and have a credible book. I was trying initially to, do the New York agent and New York publisher thing. And the rule of thumb with them is 90 to 100,000 words for a novel, or we don't even want to talk to you. And it turns out they didn't want to talk to me anyway, because, well, I'm not sure why, but evidently that wasn't kind of what they were looking for. So I got the bulk of it, when I finally focused the story on this particular period right after her family went back to the US, there was a great deal of the narrative that I got rid of on my own. But within that narrative, the 158,000 words that I wrote, much of that went away thanks to my beta readers, who were patient and wonderful people. Never underestimate the value of a good reader who knows enough about literature to give you serious critique, and generally is good about either not telling you how wonderful it is or not telling you it's ghastly either. But telling you this is what would make it better. You need to cut this out. You're starting it too early. Start the story later on, that kind of thing.
And so was there anything in there that that your beta readers or your editors said you need to cut this out, and you're like, no, I really like this, I want it to stay in?
There were too many of those I can't even remember specifically what some of those were now. There was one I have at the salon that I mentioned, where she's meeting all of these Parisian artists and intellectuals for the first time. I have her meeting this poet. And he was sort of based on a real life person. I found a volume of this poet's writing at a flea market in Paris when I went over there to do research. And one of his poems particularly struck me. It was about, he's writing it to this woman about how her eyes are so terrifying. They're full of their heaven and hell. And, they look at me and they freeze my blood and stuff like this. And this poet, as I conceived him in this scene in the book, was a kind of wheezy old fat guy with a big walrus mustache, and he was just enchanted with Annie, and he thought she hung the moon. And she gets an anonymous poem in the mail a few scenes later, and she thinks, "Oh my God, I've got a secret admirer. Maybe somebody out there is, interested in me," and she's kind of liking that idea. But then she figures out that it's this wheezy old fat guy. And she knows she shouldn't be prejudiced against wheezy old fat guys, but she is. So anyway, cut that out. It was because I wanted to use that poem that I'd found at the flea market.
Right. Okay.
It really didn't add to the story. And it was taking attention away from the main thrust of the book.
Right. Okay. Now, so Roberta, if people want to learn more about you and your work, you just have a website that is robertaharold.com, correct?
Yeah. It's got all the http://www thing in front of it. But robertaharold.com will get you there. Absolutely.
So yes, this was fantastic, and we ran out of time because I did want to talk a little bit about your mystery books, but that means you just have to come back on again, and we'll talk more about some of these books and whatever book you're working on next.
That sounds great to me. I'd love to do that. It's been really enjoyable talking with you, Barney.
All right. Thank you so much. I guess my first question to you, and this is what I love about pre-recording, is that I can actually edit to make me sound super smart in the final thing, Roberta. So this
Well, me
is
too, maybe. That would be great.